People who have very high levels of stress, they'll tend to desire a lot more salt than the average person. I have never felt so bad as when I'm salt deficient. It was so common that they made a law throughout most of the Western world that all grains had to have vitamin B1 added to it. Glucaronic acid, it helps to break down a lot of different types of toxins and bind to them to remove them out of the body.
Welcome to the Rejuvenate Podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwyn Robinson, and we are continuing the conversation on the most overlooked and underrated essential nutrients. So, Elwyn, let's kick it off. Calcium glucarate, what is it?
Usually calcium D-glucarate. I was debating whether to add this as a nutrient, but it is something that your body makes itself. And so, technically it would be in the category of nutrient. So I wanted to add it today. The reason why I love calcium glucarate is because it helps to detoxify. And it especially helps to detoxify two of the things which we have such an issue with in our modern day life, one of which is kind of known, one of which is not well known, but which I've talked about before, and that's estrogen and also retinoic acid, which is the most toxic form of vitamin A. So those are the two reasons why I take it, but in fact, glucarate helps to break down all kinds of or glucaronic acid technically, helps to break down all kinds of toxicity. Not every kind, but it helps to break down a lot of different types of toxins and binds to them to remove them out of the body. It's part of the phase 2 detoxification system. We've talked about that in detail before in our episode on detox, but just very quickly, phase 1 of detox is often where your body will take something toxic and turn it into something more toxic temporarily. Phase 2 is where it will then bind it to something that allows it to be then safely transported out of the body. That's the very simple way of saying it. And so I'm like milk thistle is well known as a detox supporter, but it helps more with phase 1 detoxification. I'm a big fan of helping with things that are, recommending things which help more with the second phase of the detoxification process because they're much less likely to create unwanted side effects. And so I'm a big fan of calcium glucarate. The other reason I'm a big fan of calcium glucarate is because I found through hearing of others' anecdotal experience and then also experiencing myself, that it really seems to help with cholestasis. So cholestasis, as a reminder, is when the bile gets stuck, at least to some degree, and doesn't flow freely out of the liver through the gallbladder into the intestines, and then ideally out of the body. The reason why that won't happen is because the bile thickens up too much. There are all kinds of nutrients which will help with that not happening that we've talked about before. But for whatever reason, which I haven't discovered yet, if anyone knows, put it in the comments, glucarate seems to help with that process of getting the bile flowing. Not only that, but it will also help with binding the toxins once it is already flowing. So it really is helping in both senses. Glucarate is also something that can help with alcohol to some degree, although it wouldn't be the number one thing that I went to. If I wanted to detoxify alcohol, it should still help with that to some degree as well.
Well, what would that number one thing be? Or maybe we need to do a whole episode on that.
Yeah, probably glutathione, just to give a quick answer. So there are a few different ways that your body will bind those toxins to safely transport them out of the body. Mm-hmm. One of them is glutathione, one of them is glucuronidation, which is what we're talking about now of glutarate. One is methylation, which we've talked about a lot. One was acetylation, one is sulfation. We've actually talked about most of them, even though it's not a detox episode in this full episode. But yeah, so glucarate is probably my favorite type because it seems to have the least side effects. Like when glutathione gets heavy metals moving, or when sulfation and thiols get heavy metals moving, often they can make you feel worse, stuff like that.
And then they're also going to need like a charcoal or some other kind of binder to get them out?
Yes, because none of those systems are perfect. So even though they're supposed to be binding it, to also take an additional binder is very useful. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. But yeah, it's the unexplained to me so far capacity of glucarate to really help keep the bile flowing in addition, which is phase 3 of detox. Actually, not just the chemical processes within the liver, but getting it from the liver out of the body, that I really love glucarate. And so I would recommend it to most people. They may not have the other issues that I talked about, but everyone these days has an estrogen issue, right? Everyone is surrounded by xenoestrogen, man-made estrogens, too much of the plant estrogen, phytoestrogens, birth control pill, residue in the drinking water, actually being given birth control pills, soy in the food. I mean, it's endless. And so, there's a whole book about this called Estrogen Dominance, which I highly recommend if you've not heard of this, if you don't know what I'm talking about. Estrogens are responsible for a lot of the different cell mutations that are undesirable and that can kill you, which I'm not allowed to comment on very much. And estrogen is also very closely related to stress chemicals. We've had both Dr. Michael Platt talk about that, and we've talked about Dr. Ray Peat's work on that estrogen could be considered to be a stress chemical. So where estrogen is raised, you're more likely to have cortisol raised, you're more likely to have adrenaline raised, you're more likely to have these other stress chemicals raised, you're definitely more likely to have inflammation. All of these negative things can come with too much estrogen. So anything that helps transport excess estrogen out the body is good, and that is, glucarate. I've seen actual medical doctors recommend glucarate to clients many times before, and it's always for that reason. It's for estrogen. I'm not sure if they know about the rest, but... Can
I ask you quickly, do you recall the author of that book, Estrogen Dominance?
No, there's only one person who authored that book and coined the term.
Okay, perfect. And so then with this, with calcium glucarate, is it possible to get this in food?
Yeah, so... glucaric acid you can absolutely get from food. It's high in plant foods, and it's especially high in fruits, and it's especially high in apples. Now that's interesting because of the whole, first of all, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, the amount of glucarate in apples is significant. On average, one apple, and yeah, that's even these days with all the bad soil and the rest of it, one apple has about 500 milligrams of glucaric acid, glucarate. So that's the equivalent of one capsule of supplement. So this, I think, is one of the reasons why when people do liver flushing, they often do large amounts of apple for the week beforehand. The most famous person who taught that is Andreas Moritz, who taught how to do liver flushing, I would say, to the biggest audience. He said that the reason why he recommended apple is because it contains malic acid, and malic acid helps to dissolve calcium stones, which can be gallstones. But I believe that he either didn't know or didn't want to say the probably more significant impact, which is that maybe because he didn't understand why, just like I don't, but that for some reason the glucarate helps to get the bile moving. And of course, people who are doing liver flushes, that's usually actually what's going on, is that they've got cholestasis to some degree. The bile has become sludge. That's what they call it medically. And so it's not flowing very well because it's sludgy. And so the glucarate helps it to become more liquid and so flow freely again. So I think that's why, having... I think, is it a liter of apple juice? What's that, 10 apples a day, something like that, before you do a liver flush? I think the reason for that is because the person would then be having such a large dose of glucarate, which would really help the detoxification process in general, and then the cholestasis issue, get the bile flowing.
And then are there different forms of the calcium glucarate?
Yes. So yeah, sorry, I wasn't very clear on that. So the type you get in food is glucaric acid. And that's the type that your body also creates itself. The type you get in supplement is calcium glucarate or calcium D-glucarate. So it's this stuff, glucuronic acid, bound in this case to calcium. Because it's an acid, it's good to buffer it so it's not, having a highly acidic effect. So you often see that. They do it, for instance, quite famously with vitamin C, right? Vitamin C can be quite acidic and maybe create like a stomach acid issue for some people. So they offer like the buffered vitamin C, where it's magnesium ascorbate or calcium ascorbate. So where they use an alkaline mineral to combine with it. And so, yeah, calcium glucarate or calcium D-glucarate is calcium bound to the glucaric acid to buffer it. And that's the supplement version. And
when someone is supplementing, what dose are they looking at taking when they are using calcium glucarate?
Yeah, it's a good question. So usually, you see it recommended like 1 or 2 capsules a day. One of the other benefits, by the way, that it's sold for, although I think it's a bit spurious, but is, as well as hormonal balance, which we talked about a little bit of estrogen, is weight loss. And I think that's because it's reducing estrogen, the 2 hormones that really help you to maintain weight no matter what you do, right? No matter how much you exercise and all the rest of it. Well, the ones that do that in the active sense are estrogen and insulin. I guess the lack of other ones would also create the issue. But anyway, the 2 hormones that really make you put on fat are estrogen and insulin. And so I can see why something that's so good at reducing your estrogen could be sold as a weight loss thing. Although I think you need quite a lot of it. And that's why I brought up the amount that's in an apple, right? So calcium glucarate is usually sold in like 250 milligram capsules or 500 milligram capsules. Well, again, a 500 milligram capsules is the equivalent of 1 apple. So that's not a crazy amount, right? So we could ask the question, how many apples is it safe to eat?
But there's only so many apples you can eat before you really are done.
True. And for people who are really against fructose and fruit, they may say 0, right? So it depends on where you're coming from. But I think we all know, even if it's not ideal to eat loads of apples, maybe if some people believe that, which I respect, it's certainly not going to kill you, right? And I guess that's the same point with the calcium glucarate. You can easily have 1,000 milligrams, 2,000 milligrams, maybe even 3,000 milligrams a day. I think the most that's usually recommended is 2,000 milligrams a day. But I'm very sensitive, and I have not seen any downside to having more than that. Like, a lot of things, like a lot of the other type 2 detoxification supporters, like glutathione, like sulfate, if I have those, they create problems with me. I do not have any of those issues with glucarate. It just seems to bind the bad stuff and transport it out of your body. So I'm a big fan of it out of all of the detoxifications. I know that glutathione is like the famous one that people focus on and have heard of and like and pay for. But I would submit glucarate as superior because it seems to me to have way less side effects while being equally beneficial in its own way.
Are there safety concerns with this?
So remember, this is something that your body also creates naturally. So it's something, that you may well want to do periodically, or even if you do it long term, you're doing it long term for a specific reason. So for instance, if you are estrogen dominant, often that's something that is genetic, it goes back for many generations. And so it may well be that you're not going to get your estrogen down to an optimal level in 30 days of supplementation, right? You may have to do it for a long time, along with, various other changes. So I don't know if it's necessarily something that you want to have every day for the rest of your life, but I think if you want to support your detoxification system in general, if you know that you have high levels of specific things that glucarate helps to reduce, like estrogen, I would really keep taking it until it's worked. And then I would monitor it to, if you stop, to see if you might want to take it again.
How would you know if it's worked?
Well, for instance, in the case of estrogen, right? If you have high estrogen in the reference range, take it for 6 months until it's in the middle of the reference range, great. But don't then assume that the problem's solved, right? Because you may have that, genetic tendency. I would test again. If your estrogen goes back up, maybe you should just keep taking it, in the same way that you might have an apple a day for the rest of your life. And in fact, if you like apples and they don't disagree with you and they, you don't have a candida issue or whatever, a sugar issue, then have apples. Not only do they have glucarate, they actually do have a bunch of other things that are also good for you, like malic acid. It's funny, I think apples traditionally were known as one of the healthiest fruits. And then there was a bit of a probably well-meaning propaganda campaign about how all kinds of other things were better, especially the brightly colored fruits. And I'm not convinced about that anymore. I'm pretty convinced that probably apple is the healthiest, at least of the sweet fruit. You can make an argument for some of the fatty fruits also being very beneficial, like olives. You can make an argument for maybe some of the non-sweet fruits to be beneficial, like the citrus fruits. But out of the sweet fruits, I would really say apple's the best. So you don't necessarily ever have to supplement it if you want to have apples. And there are other foods that have a large amount, but not as large as apples. So if you really want to make progress in detoxifying, it's probably apples or supplements.
There's a lot of benefits here, especially with the calcium glucarate for people that are needing that extra support with detoxification, that potentially do have too much estrogen, or maybe, have some weight and they don't understand why it's not shifting. So this could be something that they could look into. It'd be something easy to add into their supplementation program. So overall, it sounds like something that people could really look at to consider adding in.
Yeah, and I'd say another benefit is it has a very mild taste. So I actually have a powdered version these days rather than a capsule. I know people don't want to take a lot of capsules, which I understand. So, I just use a powdered form. I add it to, soup or stew or whatever I'm having that is liquid, and I can't taste it, So if you don't want to have the food version, you can still kind of add it to food rather than thinking of it as yet another supplement that someone's telling you to take. And if you buy in bulk in the powder form, it can be pretty cheap as well. It can be relatively inexpensive.
Vitamin B1 sounds very simple, but I'm sure there are tons of reasons why I need it. So please tell me why I need this one.
So it's a combination of B1 of, first of all, it being absolutely essential for so many processes in the body, especially making energy, as well as the health of your nervous system, which of course is the thing that determines how you feel. Plus the combination of our modern day lifestyle uses up a lot more vitamin B1 than probably most of our ancestors had. Plus the fact that it's actually very difficult to get enough vitamin B1 from a normal diet. This is so true. And well, it's so true and so recognized that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the medical deficiency of vitamin B1 was actually very common, which was called beriberi. And it was so common that they made a law throughout most of the Western world that all grains had to have vitamin B1 added to it. It's called fortification. And as a result of that, beriberi kind of went away, although this is a little bit disputed. With a lot of these vitamin deficiency diseases, the kind of mainstream story is that the deficient used to be common, and then the government interceded. This happened with vitamin B1, it happened with iodine, it happened with some of the other B vitamins. And then now we don't have the deficiency anymore. And they're doing it right now D3. They're starting to insist it be fortified in people's food. However, I would argue that probably beriberi is actually more common than people think, and it's just not diagnosed as beriberi anymore. But anyway, that's a medical issue. That's an opinion. I'm not going to attempt to diagnose you or anyone else here, Chrissy, with beriberi. But we can talk about what suboptimal levels can do. So to go back to your question, why is that? It's a tricky one. Like how our ancestors got as far as they did with it being as unavailable in our food as it is hard to say. I know in the keto community, they have an answer for this, and that's that the more carbohydrates that you intake, the more vitamin B1 you need to process those carbohydrates. And so they claim it's not so much that our natural diets are fundamentally deficient in them. It's that because of the amount of carbs we eat, our natural diets are fundamentally deficient.
It's just using it up. So there's a lot of demand over here and just not enough supply to break all that down.
Absolutely. Other things that use it up are various toxins, alcohol consumption, stress, blood sugar imbalance in general.
Sounds like a lot of things everybody's experiencing.
Absolutely. So it may be that in a moderate to low carbohydrate diet with low stress, low contact with toxins and all the rest of it, that people's diets were vaguely adequate. But again, that's not necessarily the case. Like Weston Price did a lot of work showing that some of the fat-soluble vitamins, for instance, were hard for people to get, and a lot of traditional cultures would go to a lot of effort, whether it was hunting or fermentation or various different processes to make sure they got enough of these hard to get nutrients. So vitamin B1 may well be in that category. And of course, vitamin B1 does tend to be higher in some foods than others. It tends to be quite high in animal foods. Again, I know this is upsetting to plant-based people. I keep saying this. There were some exceptions, right, where I said they were higher in plant foods, but B1 is one of those examples. There are exceptions. Some of the highest sources of B1 are some of the nuts. Off the top of my head, I think macadamia is definitely one of them. I think almond is another one. So there's a few definitely plant-based nutrients that are also quite high in B1. But the crazy thing is, like, nothing is very high in B1. So it's very interesting with the different B vitamins. A lot of the time, the amount that's like the recommended daily amount, you're often actually better off if you have a lot more. And often when you buy a B complex, it will give you like 100 times the recommended amount. Sometimes even like the case of B12, it give you 1,000 times the recommended amount.
Why do you think it does that?
Well, because all the B vitamins are water soluble, and so it's very hard to overdose on them. That's the main reason. So because in the case of B12, there's no danger of giving 1,000 times the recommended amount. And some people, have issues absorbing them. Some people would say the formula in a supplement is not easily absorbed, so therefore you have to give more. So yeah, probably a few different reasons. But if you do, and then there are certain foods where if you have them, you get plenty of it. So while there are a lot of people with B12 deficiency, I think I saw statistics like 60% of vegans, but also even 30% of people who eat animal foods have a B12 deficiency. Despite that, if you eat certain foods, you can get 10 times the recommended amount of B12. It's not that hard to get if you actually look at it and know what you're doing. And you can, either look up food tables, do it the old-fashioned way, or these days there's apps, right, where you just type in all the food you're having, or if you're eating food out of a packet, you can even just scan the barcode, and a lot of times it'll know what the nutrients are. So, you can get an idea of the nutrients of the food you're eating to a reasonable degree these days. So, even with a lot of things that people end up deficient in, like B12, like K2, like iron, like zinc, if you just are aware of it and you eat certain foods, you'll have loads. But with B1, even if you're aware of it, there's no certain food that you can eat that will have loads, that will have plenty, so that you have plenty. That's the interesting thing. The other thing about B1 is that, so B1 is a cofactor. So let's say an essential ingredient in all kinds of enzymatic processes, which means the process of turning one thing into another. So, and it's especially in the area of the nervous system and energy creation. And so there is quite good evidence that even if you're getting enough B1, if you have way more than enough B1, it will kind of speed up certain processes, which will then improve your health above and beyond anything to do with a deficiency. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, as well as about beriberi and how it may well be more common than people think it is and all the rest of it, I initially came across this through the work of someone on YouTube called Elliot Overton. And then he recommended, kind of, I think, probably the pioneer, and this is this Derek Lonsdale, who did a book. I can't remember, it's a long title, but Derek Lonsdale, a book on thiamine, also known as vitamin B1. He goes into great detail about this, and it's hard to read that book without being convinced that, everyone has B1 deficiency, and B1 deficiency is like the cause of every disease and every problem in the world. I mentioned the nervous system. Well, of course, the nervous system is responsible for how you feel, so anxiety could be B1 deficiency. Cognitive ability could be B1 deficiency. Depression could be B1 deficiency. It goes on and on and on. Now, the thing that B1 is probably most known for, well, I suppose there's a couple of things. One of them is energy, and the other one is its very beneficial impacts on the nervous system. And it's especially beneficial for something called neuropathy.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so neuro means nervous system, and pathy means disease, like pathology. So neuropathy just means disease of the nervous system. So it's a very general term. What neuropathy means to people in practice is usually numbness, tingling, lack of coordination, ultimately pain. So it's like where the nerves just aren't functioning properly. Maybe you might get a tick, maybe you might get, twitching and stuff like that as well, though that's more commonly other things. But yeah, numbness, tingling, and pain are usually the triumvirate of neuropathy. And you can have neuropathy for a lot of reasons. I've researched this extensively for a product I was developing, so we could do an episode on this at some point, Chrissy, if you want.
Definitely.
Okay, awesome. But it can be caused by lots of things, but the most common thing it's caused by far in our world, the modern world, is it's a side effect of diabetes, and so it's a blood sugar issue. And so that's the other reason why people tend to take B1 is because they have blood sugar issues. So the number one customer of B1 as a supplement, like high doses, is people with diabetes, insulin resistance, or neuropathy, which tend to all go together. And B1 will tend to help with all of those significantly. I would say there is no better supplement for neuropathy than a specific form of B1. And in fact, it's so effective that although in the US and I'm pretty sure the UK it's classed as a supplement, in plenty of other countries it's classed as a drug. Basically, the difference between supplement and drug is actually a very arbitrary difference, shown in the fact that a lot of the time it's just, one country calls it a drug, one country calls it a supplement. And so, but usually, basically, if something is very, very effective in a very obvious, immediate sense, then they often classify it as a drug. If something has more widespread but hard to define benefits, then often they class it as a supplement. So B1 definitely has widespread, hard to define benefits, as I talked about, but it does have such an immediate, powerful benefit for neuropathy that many countries designate it as a drug.
Wonderful. And so then you did mention a certain form. So I'm assuming that there might be a couple different forms of B1 potentially, or is there,
Yes.
a form that you're going to, okay. Yeah. Let us know what those are, please.
So the cheapest form available, which I haven't really heard anyone say is the best, is thiamine monohydrate. The much more common form that you usually see in supplements that's, I think, slightly more expensive, but not much, which is perfectly acceptable to me, is thiamine hydrochloride. Now, there is another form that's supposed to be the best absorbed, and that is coenzymated, I think it's sometimes called, or activated. So basically, with in fact, all the vitamins, but especially commercially with the B vitamins, there's like a form that your body can turn into the active form, and then there's the actual active form. And usually the active form is more expensive, and some people say it's not necessary, that it costs a lot more and your body can do it easily itself. So I kind of take that on a case-by-case basis a little bit. But anyway, the active coenzymated form of vitamin B1 is called allithiamine, and certainly some people who are an expert in B1, like the before mentioned Elliot Overton, would say that is better. That especially if you have become very deficient in B1, maybe your body struggles to take it up, and so like the allithiamine is better. I do not like that form because it stinks of garlic to me. And okay. I hate garlic. It's very sulfurous. Sulfurous things still disagree with me. I just don't like them. And so it is that. Some people love sulfur and love garlic, so that would not be an off-putting thing to you, but it is to me. I also have found that the just the hydrochloride form is very, very powerful. That's the other thing. So I had a few years ago, probably just as a result of toxicity, I had neuropathy symptoms. And then I came across the research about B1, and I took some thiamine hydrochloride just because that's what I had. And I had like 500 milligram capsules, which are a lot. You know, you would only get a couple of milligrams a day from food if you're lucky. So 500 milligrams is a lot. So I remember I like opened the capsule and just tipped some into my mouth. Honestly, I remember the first few times I had it, it felt like taking speed. I mean, first of all, the taste is quite similar. It's like bitter in that kind of speedy way. But it just had such a overstimulating effect on me. It was crazy. And this is because B1, although we talked about a bunch of other things, I did mention a little bit of energy. Well, it's also part of the process of making dopamine and the other catecholamines like noradrenaline and adrenaline. So I'm not quite sure if it had such a powerful effect on me because it was just helping my body make ATP better, but I think that's unlikely. I think it probably is also because it was making my body make more of the catecholamines. But whatever, and I've seen people again who are experts in this talk about this, how sometimes they could be, if you're the more deficient you are, the more of an extreme reaction you can have when you first start taking it. And so yeah, because of that experience, I think even the normal form is perfectly effective, because it certainly was with me. But I believe and understand that maybe certain people it's not, and they need like the more activated form. Now, for specific purposes, there are other versions. If your issue is neuropathy, the form that I talked about earlier, which is often classified as a pharmaceutical, is benfotiamine. So benfotiamine is a form of thiamine which has been altered to be fat soluble as well. So B vitamins are inherently water soluble, like we talked about. So the fact that it goes into the fat cells as well seems to be very beneficial for the nervous system. For some reason that I have not seen explained, but in my experience is absolutely true, despite it being fat soluble, there still doesn't seem to be a way of taking an excess amount. I will say I've taken this off and on, but largely on for years now at doses, again, way higher, you know, several hundred milligrams, without any issue whatsoever, without any hint of an issue. So I don't know why that is. I guess it's maybe because your body can still convert it back into the water-soluble form and get rid of it if there's too much of it. Possibly also because my body's actually using all of it. Like we were talking about earlier, you might only need a couple of milligrams to survive or not get beriberi, but maybe your body can actually make use of several hundred milligrams a day for various purposes of creating energy and optimizing the nervous system and all the rest of it. So that's benfotiamine. And then the final form, which I see, and again, this is classified as a drug in some countries, is sulbutamine. And so this is another modified form that is sold as a nootropic. So this is sold as a brain booster and as a dopamine booster as well. And so sometimes I do all of them. I'll have thiamine hydrochloride in my B complex, so my multi. I'll have benfotiamine for my immune system, for my nervous system, and I might have sulbutamine to give me a boost as well.
With the other two, the benfotiamine and the sulbutamine, I mean, because I know with the B complex you take that every day, but with these other two forms, is it something that you would do for a while, give yourself a break, or can you take those indefinitely as well? So
the sulbutamine, it is generally recommended to give it a break. Not necessarily because it's dangerous, but because it just stops working as well if you keep taking it. Again, unfortunately, I don't understand the mechanism for that as to why that's the case, but that's commonly believed. I don't even know for sure if it's true, but that's what's believed. With the benfotiamine, I would say if you're someone with neuropathy and diabetes type 2, take a lot for as long as you need it, which may well be forever, you know, because often these situations are not healed and not resolved, right? They're considered incurable from a mainstream point of view. So yeah, take it as long as you need it. Any danger from having too much is going to be less than the, you know, danger of having a diseased nervous system, which the additional B1 can help with.
And you mentioned some dosages earlier, but are there, what is the recommended doses that you would say with B1?
So for thiamine hydrochlorides, in your normal multi or your B complex, if you don't have any particular issue, I'd say 25 to 50 milligrams is a good amount. That would be plenty without being excessive for anyone. I'd say for benfotiamine, it usually is the lowest I've ever seen is like 200 milligrams. And I think I've seen them in 500 milligram capsules. And then, the recommendation on the labels usually take several a day. So we're talking about high doses when it comes to benfotiamine. And salbutamine, I think that's, in the range of 200 to 300 milligrams a day, something like that. And then something that you take off and on. So again, so much more than you could ever get from a diet, no matter what food you ate. But for some reason, it seems to be beneficial. I haven't seen conclusive theories as to how this could be the case, but one I have heard, Chrissy, to answer your question from earlier, is maybe we used to have a different microbiome where the bacteria are creating it, like a lot more of the B1. Maybe we used to get it. And in fact, maybe some people still do. And that might be why some people are just fine, even when they have a lot of carbs and alcohol and all the rest of it. And some people, it's catastrophic. The B1 may well be a factor, and that may well be some kind of organism. I think that is not understood.
And then going into my next one, and I'm pretty sure that this one is pretty safe, but are there any instances where somebody should be concerned with taking high doses?
Well, I said earlier that I did, and it made me feel like I was taking speed. I think the more that you identify that you're deficient, if you go down that rabbit hole like I did, the more actually you have to be careful with it to begin with, not to overdo it. So it's counterintuitive, but the more you need it, actually, the less you should take. I don't know why, as I said, but it seems to speed some things up, and that can be disconcerting when you're first starting. I don't know if it's actually a negative effect or not, but it can be disconcerting. But as I said, like benfotiamine, the fact that it's considered as a drug in some countries means that there are, extensive research documents around it. And no toxicity even with long-term use at, pretty substantial doses.
Right. So B1 sounds like pretty much of a powerhouse. It's a cofactor for many processes in the body. And I do know that in our NutriVal, I would see B1 in a lot of those spaces. So it's something to definitely make sure that we're getting plenty of the B vitamins, especially B1, so that the processes that they can be, as you said, one, they can happen, but two, if we're having that extra, then that's giving our body potentially more energy to do a lot of other things that it really does need to do.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I wouldn't say it's necessarily, it's not more important than B12. B12 deficiency is very serious. It's also a real issue because once you get to a certain point, some people say it's even impossible to reverse, So it's just that people already know about B12, People seem to be oblivious to B1. So that's why I want to focus on it.
No, I'm glad you highlighted it. Thank you. Which now takes us into B3. So I'm assuming there's going to be a lot more here because there's obviously the B complex, but you're particularly pointing out this one. So B3, tell me, why is this so important?
Yeah, so a few different reasons. So it is something that is not too difficult to get enough of from diet, but there seems to be an issue where some people need a lot more than others, first and foremost. And so there's definitely a genetic component to that. There may also be an environmental one. So B3 is the building block for energy and ATP production as well. It's one of the essential cofactors for that. I mean, there are a lot of cofactors for that, but it's one of the most important rate limiting ones. And it's for that reason that different components related to B3 are becoming very popular, even in very expensive forms for, anti-aging, like NAD+, which is really NR, or NMN. These are forms that we can talk about in a bit, which are becoming very popular. They're considered to help with anti-aging. But, there are reasons for that, like various genes that they, activate and promote. But fundamentally, I'd say more than anything, it's that essential part of the production of energy, which I would focus on with B3, and why I want to make sure that I get plenty of it.
And so with B3, what is the common name for that?
Yeah, good question. So this is called niacin or nicotinic acid, but there are other forms. So there's niacinamide is another form. And then, we talked about NR, niacinamide riboside, I think that's it. And then NMN, which I won't attempt. I can't remember exactly what that is. But they're all really forms of B3. Not everyone would agree with me on that because they say, oh, it's different enough. It, could be classified as its own thing. But they're all variations of B3. So the person who first really flagged up B3 as being super important was Dr. Linus Pauling, who was more famous for his work with high-dose vitamin C. But the thing that I found most interesting about his work was actually his work with B3. So he noticed that schizophrenics were all, they all, at least they could, smoked. Like without any exceptions. I mean, his work was in the 70s and 80s. So I don't know if they let schizophrenics in mental hospitals smoke these days, but at that time he noticed that. And I don't think it was just in mental hospitals, it was just in general. So nicotine is similar to nicotinic acid. The fact that their names are similar is not a coincidence. So nicotinic acid is the how do I say it? Not active form, but I guess the unaltered form of vitamin B3. So when you have too much nicotinic acid or vitamin B3, something happens to you. And you get what's called a niacin flush, which is similar to a histamine response. It definitely relates to elevated histamine. So your body goes red. Your blood pressure will go down. You'll often feel like maybe itchy or prickly kind of sensation. It can feel very weird and disorienting. Some people really freak out if it happens to them. When you let them know it is just temporary, they're okay, usually. And then kind of on the other side of it, it kind of does the opposite. So it causes all the capillaries to really expand and it causes them to contract. So you tend to feel very hot briefly and then you kind of feel cold afterwards. And so that's called the niacin flush. So that niacin flush is indicating you have had enough. In fact, you've had more than enough. Now, the interesting thing that Linus Pauling found is that with schizophrenics, he could give them 100 times as much as the normal dose of niacin before they had that kind of effect. So the conclusion that he drew from that was some people need way more than others. And it was probably the first chink in the armor of this idea that everyone just needs the same of everything, right? Like this recommended daily amount. Sometimes they vary it by gender, but they're really only talking about difference in size between genders usually. And sometimes they recommend a different amount for pregnant women, but it's all about the same, right? And so that was the first indication, I believe, and certainly that I heard of, where there was like, oh, you might need way more of this thing than the average person just to feel okay. Now, he also claimed that a lot of these people, their symptoms of schizophrenia substantially improved when they took this very high dose of B3. I don't think that has been really proven, but it's one of those things, right, where there's not a lot of motivation for proving that this non-patentable super cheap nutrient will completely resolve something. So, but
if it makes it better, that's something to look at.
Yeah, I'm saying it's an if. I think, a lot of people have tried to discredit Linus Pauling's work since then. But if nothing else, there is a very wide variety between how much niacin will make a person flush, how much niacin will be excessive for each person. So now there is another form called niacinamide. And so that's a version of niacin which doesn't create the flush effect. It seems to be bound in a way that it kind of releases it slowly, and so it doesn't create that flush effect. I've seen quite a few experts say not to take it. The fact that it keeps slowly releasing niacin into your bloodstream kind of taxes the liver, that the liver should only have bursts of niacin, not a constant stream of niacin.
Not to take the niacinamide, right.
Yeah. But I've seen other people like Dr. Ray Peat say that niacinamide is actually better and highly beneficial and has beneficial qualities that other forms of niacin don't. For instance, he liked to use niacinamide to reduce serotonin, which he found to be very important. And, that was certainly based on research that it does do that. For whatever reason, niacinamide does significantly reduce serotonin. So, yeah, I would say it's arguable whether I was going to add this because most people do get enough from their diet to prevent the deficiency disease like pellagra. I don't suspect that there's any chance that a lot of people have pellagra. Like I suspect there may be a chance that more people than we think have beriberi, vitamin B1 deficiency. But still, because it is so essential for energy ATP production, and it's so essential for longevity and anti-aging and feeling younger, and in fact, in some schools of thought, it's considered like one of the best because of its sirtuin activation they talk about and stuff like that. Because of that, they consider it to be like one of the premium anti-aging supplements. I thought, let's talk about just B3 because it is an absolutely essential component of energy and ATP, which, as we talked about in this podcast many times, your level of feeling young, your level of youthfulness and vitality and all the rest of it is largely down to how much energy your cells can produce to nourish every cell and every system in your body.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today. Absolutely. And going into foods that you can find this in, you said you pretty much could probably get a lot of your B3 from your diet. What type of foods would we find B3 commonly in?
A lot. I mean, it's not as prevalent as like pantothenic acid, B5. That gets its name from pan, meaning like everywhere, like it's found found in everything. Even with B5, there are certain reasons why you might have a high dose, even though you'll never be deficient, because a high dose can support the adrenal glands specifically. And so it's the same with B3, right? You can support these beneficial processes, even though you are not likely to be deficient in it if you eat a normal diet. But basically, if you eat a whole foods diet, if you don't eat a highly processed diet, then you're going to get enough B3. Now, of course, if you had a lot of white rice only without other nutritious foods, right? Like the B3 would be in the fibrous husk part of the grain, not on the white part of the grain. So, same with white sugar, white rice, all of that kind of thing. They will be low in B3, but otherwise it's pretty high in a lot of foods, animal foods and plant foods.
Could you give us the full list of all the forms of B3?
Yes. So type that flushes you, the most, I guess real type is nicotinic acid. Niacinamide is that, but altered to make it kind of like a time release version. So it doesn't create that flush effect. Then there is NR, which is often sold as NAD+. So NAD is this essential part of the ATP energy production process. But really it's fed by and created by vitamin B3. So your body would turn nicotinic acid into NR, and it would turn nicotinic acid into NMN. But there's the thinking that, as with all of these processes, as we've talked about many times before, your body may be inefficient in making that conversion. And even if your body can make the conversion, it may be better to add more of the ready-made version to give your body a break. So that's in a simple version of the theory why you would take something like NR or NMN. But NR and NMN are just really, really expensive. Niacin is extremely cheap, as all B vitamins are, to have, even an optimal dose or a normal recommended dose. Whereas NMN and NR are both very expensive. So it's a choice. Some doctors, some specialists will say it's completely unnecessary, just take niacin, it's a waste of money. Some will say, no, for this reason or that reason, like the ones that I've mentioned, it is better to take it despite the cost. So I'd say really it depends on your budget.
Right. So NAD plus is the end conversion process from B3 through the NR, NMN to NAD plus. Is that correct?
No, it's a bit more complicated than that, okay. But basically, it's to do with how do I say it simply? It's to do with the conversion of one thing to another again. And so the B3 through its NAD process is essential for that conversion that ultimately creates ATP. It's not so much that B3 is like an ingredient of ATP. It's like the processes that it enables are essential to create the ATP. Sorry, I know that's still not very simple.
No, don't worry, it's all good. Okay. But I totally understand what you're saying about sometimes that conversion process, there's something not allowing our bodies to do it. So hence why taking that end product could be more beneficial, just so we can get to the process that needs to be done so that we're more supportive of our body as we're trying to work it all out.
Yeah. And I think if it were twice the price or even 5 times the price, I would probably say yes, I'd be convinced enough that it is worth it. I think it's because it's like, 100 times the price or whatever, like that it is quite expensive compared to how cheap. Just that may not be true for supplement to supplement, but because of the markup on it, but literally, buying the raw ingredient is so much more expensive getting the NMN or the NR that it's arguable whether it's beneficial, but I've done it. Some people get a really good boost from it. Some people feel very energized. With the NR version, some people do experience a detox effect from it. There's still a lot of controversy in this world. So some people inject NR and sometimes NMN as well in terms of intramuscular. Some people do an IV. There's a whole kind of procedure where you do an IV of what they call NAD+, but I believe it is just NR again, that has a really, really intense effect, kind of a little bit similar to the niacin flush effect, but not different again. And people afterwards, they feel really invigorated. Some people afterwards feel very cleansed by it. But there are skeptics, and I'm not sure about it either. So one of the other uses of high dose niacin, which we haven't touched upon, is, what's commonly called the Scientology cleanse. So one of the things that they recommend in Scientology is you take a very high dose of B3 along with a sauna. And so what is true is that B3, at least in the form of nicotinic acid, not in the form of niacin, it actually does the opposite, but in the form of nicotinic acid in large amounts. So that in that flushing process, it's not only expanding capillaries, what it's also doing is it's speeding up lipolysis. So the breaking down of fat cells. And so I guess some people would do it as a weight loss strategy, although I think it's more of a detox thing. So generally your body stores its worst, most toxic toxins in the fat cells. And so taking high doses of nicotinic acid and also NR, maybe in the way that we talked about, will release that toxicity. The idea being that your body can then process it and get it out. But some people obviously struggle with that, as we talked about in different episodes. So some people would say that maybe the high you're getting after taking NAD plus is just the high of adrenaline because you've released so much toxicity into your body all of a sudden. as I said, I've heard both perspectives and I don't know which is true yet, which is why I bring you back to, rather than playing with these very expensive and potentially, dangerous or counterproductive things, I would recommend definitely make sure you're getting enough niacin. I've already said you're getting enough for food. So I guess what I mean from that is make sure that you get plenty, right? Get a B vitamin. As you talked about, Chrissy, in the NutriVal, you often see, a need for B3, even though people get plenty from their diet. I don't think that's because they're not absorbing enough in their food necessarily. I really think that's the reason, is because the NutriVal doesn't so much work through detecting the level of the B vitamin in the blood or the cell. It works by looking at these chemical byproducts and going, oh, based on your level of that byproduct, it looks like this is working too slowly or this is working too quickly. And based on that, they can say you're probably missing a cofactor. And so that's how they decide that you need more of these various nutrients. So I think the fact that the B3 is often recommended is not a sign that there's not enough in the food, but a sign that because of our modern day life, the toxicity, the stress, the whatever, all the stuff we always talk about, it's beneficial to get more B3 to help those processes, to give your body more of the cofactors, to speed up various different things, whether it's be NAD or many of the other reactions that it's involved in. And so I do recommend B3 for anti-aging, even if I'm wary that NR and NMN are worth the price.
What would you say for somebody that's looking to supplement? What would be a good dose for them?
So if you take it in the form of nicotinic acid, then you do have to be careful, because if you take too much, you can make yourself have that flushing effect, which can be quite scary and disconcerting if you haven't had it, and inconvenient, even if you are totally used to it. So I would definitely recommend starting off low being 10, 20 milligrams, something like that. That usually will not cause that flushing effect. And then increasing it gradually until you reach that level where it doesn't have that effect. I've noticed that occasionally it creates that effect at an amount that even usually doesn't. I think this may be because of histamine. I've noticed it happens more often if it's hot, and heat will increase your level of histamine. But generally, if you take it every day, your tolerance will go up. So if 30 milligram made you flush today, it probably won't make you flush tomorrow, although 40 might. It's one of those things. And so that's part of that Scientology cleanse, is you would start with a very low amount, and then you would keep taking more and more until you were taking very, very high amounts every day, but you could tolerate it. You would kind of keep taking more. Every time one dose doesn't make you flush, you would take more again. That's what they do. I'm not recommending that, but that's what they would do. So I would say like an extra 50 milligrams is probably plenty in most cases, in the form of niacin, nicotinic acid. In the form of niacinamide, if you're a fan of Dr. Ray Peat's work, I know some of our viewers are, he recommended a lot more. So, for specific purposes, like reducing serotonin, I know he recommended, anything from 500 milligrams of niacinamide to even 3,000 milligrams of niacinamide. And bear in mind that even the amount I just recommended for nicotinic acid, I talked earlier, some people might need 100 times as much, based on Dr. Linus Pauling's work. So it's not really an amount. It's like, I would, start very low, have a little bit more every day if you're, really into experimenting these things like I am, and then kind of find a level that makes you flush, and then just have that much and not more. That's kind of the level. But for me, it's pretty low. For me, it's, 40 milligrams, something like that. For you, it might be 1,000 milligrams, you, Chrissy, for all I know, right? And there's no way of really being able to predict that. Now, again, I'll just draw connections here for a second between Linus Pauling's work and Dr. Ray Peat's work. Linus Pauling said that schizophrenics benefited from much, much higher amounts of niacin. Dr. Ray Peat says that very high doses of niacin help to reduce serotonin. High doses of serotonin obviously create hallucinations. What is one of the fundamental, tenets of being a schizophrenic? It's having hallucinations and not being able to tell them apart from real life, which presumably would indicate having very powerful hallucinations. So, there's talk about how schizophrenics have high levels of DMT. That, when people take DMT as a drug, they temporarily maybe experience what a schizophrenic experiences on an ongoing basis. And so, they may all have been right, all these people, is what I'm saying. And so maybe the more high your serotonin is, the more niacin would benefit you. That's also possible. And so that's something, obviously, by definition, if you think that you are hallucinating, then you're probably not. The people with the problem don't know they've got the problem. So, you're not going to be able to tell that way. But that could be... there needs to be more research on that, but that's one of the other reasons I wanted to put B3 in there, because excess serotonin is such a bad thing in so many ways that we've, touched upon before, but perhaps we go into more depth, that taking enough of the thing that stops it becoming excessive is very important.
It's a really, really good point. And you throughout this conversation of B3, you have, put in what some safety concerns are here. Is there anything else besides what you have already mentioned?
I think you're going to have that flushing effect ruin your day way before it causes any other more serious medical issues. So in a way, that's kind of a safety thing, stopping you from, overdoing it. But yeah, too much can stress the liver. That is one of the safety concerns with niacinamide, because you don't get that flushing effect. As I said, Dr. Ray Peat talks about how beneficial niacinamide is. I suspect that both camps are right, that niacinamide is both highly beneficial and potentially dangerous to the liver in excess. And so I would be careful with that. There are a lot of things, whether nutrients and, commonly drugs, where if you take it, they encourage you to check your liver enzymes regularly to make sure that you're not stressing out your liver. And so if you were doing very high doses of niacin, for whatever reason, that would probably be wise to monitor the health of the liver and make sure that it's not being negatively affected.
Fantastic. All very, very good points. So B3, as we're learning here, is very, very helpful with managing serotonin, especially if it's in high doses. That it's also like it's, along with with most of the other B vitamins, maybe, I'm going to throw it in there, very beneficial for a lot of other processes in the body so it's essential that we need it for optimization in our body's functioning.
Yes. And, to sum it up, I'd say energy production and nervous system is, really all the B vitamins pretty much have in common. And I'd say B3 out of all of the B vitamins is probably your number one anti-aging B vitamin.
And so our final fantastic, essential, and most overlooked nutrient, salt, because sometimes this one gets a bit of a bad rap. So Alwyn, tell me, why did this make this list?
Well, salt, I would say, is probably our third most essential, or maybe third or fourth most essential nutrient after carbon dioxide, oxygen, and H2O, or water. It's, one of the things that we have the most of in the blood. It's essential for, so many different processes in the body. It regulates, the cardiovascular system. It regulates the digestive system. It's important for the immune system. And the crazy thing to me, of course, is that it's often treated as if it's a bad thing. And I think there is a reason for that. And it is because, the optimal dose and the toxic dose are not that far apart. And we've spoken about that before, how, with a B vitamin like B12 or B1, you can easily have 100 times the normal dose and you'll be just fine. That's not true with salt. Just like it's not true of iron, it's not true of copper, it's not true of a lot of things, but it's not true of salt even more than those things. Having too much is really, really not good. Having too much potassium is also really, really not good. In fact, these things can kill you. But I feel like in the process of not overdoing it, we have actually gone the other way and we've demonized it too much. I have never felt so bad as when I'm salt deficient, I would say. I think it's one of the worst feelings. I tried having a low salt diet because I listened to some, I think, natural hygiene system at the time that was called. And I felt terrible. The level of not being able to think clearly, low energy, dizziness. And I would say when I fasted, a lot of the time I felt bad. And then I eventually realized that more than half the feeling bad is not lack of quality, lack of calories, lack of amino acid, lack of calories, none of those things. It was just lack of salt. Like if I just added in salt, I felt so much better. So salt is really important. The reason why you might need more than, say, average is because it is also really important for the adrenal system. And so generally, the more stress you have, the more salt that you both require and desire. And so, famously, people who have very high levels of stress, maybe people who have adrenaline dominance that we talked about before, people who have a tendency to have very high adrenaline, probably high cortisol as well, they'll tend to desire a lot more salt than the average person, and they should have it. So here's the thing.
I was going to ask, why are they wanting more of that salt?
Because they need it, because it's being used up.
It's just being used up rapidly.
Yeah. Just like, adrenal activity uses up magnesium. We talked about, even uses up B5.
The B vitamins, yeah.
Yeah, especially B5, when in case of adrenal activity specifically. But, it also uses up salt. So no one's telling you should have more salt than you want. But all I want to say to you is also don't have less salt than you want because someone told you to. You may, if you need a lot of salt, it may create an issue where, because salt is to some degree balanced with potassium, you may have too little potassium in balance to it. But I do not believe that calls for consuming less salt if you desire salt. That calls for two things. First of all, resolving the root of the stress, which is creating that excessive salt craving in the first place. And then second of all, probably until you do that, and maybe even while you're recovering from that, having more potassium to balance that out, right? So some people say not to have salt or a lot of salt if you have high blood pressure, but I have absolutely seen studies and seen experts talk about how that is not necessarily the case, and that in fact, if you reduce your salt, it can increase your blood pressure, and then when you add salt back in, it can reduce your blood pressure. So I don't think this is simple. I think the thing that this comes down to, even though when we think of salt, we tend to think of the cardiovascular system, I tend to think of it more in relation to the adrenal system. So when the adrenal chemicals, especially when cortisol is high, something else called aldosterone also tends to be high, which is it's called a mineral corticoid, and it's similar but very different in a way from cortisol, but it's a hormone created by the adrenal glands that regulates the level of salt and potassium in the blood. And so when cortisol is high, we tend to hold on to sodium, and we tend to excrete potassium. When the cortisol is low, we do the opposite. We tend to hold on to potassium and excrete sodium. And so the kind of classic high cortisol person is someone who has high blood pressure as well, and maybe they have a tendency to overeat and got a bit of a temper and stuff like that. And so in that case, it is possible that if they eat loads of salt, that it is going to make their blood pressure worse. However, a person in that position is not necessarily going to desire a lot of salt because they are holding on to a lot of salt, if that makes sense. When the cortisol is low, then the aldosterone tends to be low, and then there is that tendency to hold on more to potassium and excrete the sodium. And so what I've observed is, so when I said stress tends to deplete sodium, it does depend. So from what I've been able to make out, high adrenaline and noradrenaline deplete sodium in general. But if you have high cortisol, which is kind of almost a stress buffering hormone, you tend to hold on to the sodium more, and so it's less of an issue. But if you have low cortisol, especially then you can be in a position where you need a lot of salt just to feel okay. And of course, this can vary. A lot of the time, people are on a bit of a roller coaster when it comes to cortisol. But yeah, if you have that consistent tendency for your cortisol to be low, then it is even more of an issue to make sure you have enough salt. Otherwise, you'll have a tendency for low blood pressure. You might feel dizzy when you get up. You might even have that, POTS thing, where, it's often an issue when you first stand up that you feel dizzy and you might fall down again and stuff like that. So it's not as important to make sure you have loads of salt if your cortisol was high, but it's especially important if your cortisol is also low. But overall, I would say it's when your cortisol is actually balanced and your noradrenaline and adrenaline is low, that's when you need the least salt. And so there's an argument to be made that, yes, if you are supremely enlightened and you are supremely calm and you are very centered and you are meditating many hours a day and you're not facing any of the struggles and trials of the world, you probably need very little salt. You might be able to get enough salt just from food, but when you are really up against it, especially if you're at the point probably more of fatigue or depression, which correlates to that low cortisol, rather than still in the state of being maybe, high stimulation, which corresponds more to the high cortisol, especially if you're more in the collapse stage, you will probably crave a lot of salt and you need it. I would say that salt deprivation is actually very prematurely aging, which is another reason why I wanted to talk about it, because salt is so essential for every function of the body. If you're in that position where your body's burning through it and you're becoming more depleted in it, and then you're not listening to your body's requirement for it, well, I say prematurely aging, but it can literally land you in hospital. And I've known obviously people who have. And one of the first things that they give you if you are in serious trouble and you go to hospital is water and salt.
Absolutely. Saline bag. They're going to put that up straight away.
And again, that's because, yes, high blood pressure will lead to disease if it's like chronically high over time. But usually if it's an emergency, it's often knocked like the other way around. Like your blood pressure might actually be, dangerously low, maybe because because of a lot of bleeding, but also because of shock. You might be in that shutdown, not ventral vagal, dorsal vagal state that we've talked about many times before, like that kind of shutdown state. And so then it's really, really important to get the salt. Now,
I know that there's a few different types of salt out there. So, what's the best form? Or maybe walk us through a few of the types and say, which you feel, in your opinion, is the best form.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've kind of changed my mind about this a bit over time. Some people believe that the Himalayan pink salt is the best. Some people believe that sea salt is the best. Some people believe, I guess, that the iodized salt is the best. So that's very mainstream. I actually don't know if any of those perspectives are true anymore. To me, the most important answer to that now is what's got the least poisons in it, especially lead. Microplastics is another big one. And so that could be tricky. They say with the sea salt, it's got 92 minerals in there, and that's good. I used to say that. Now I've looked into it more. I have to admit, a lot of those minerals are just toxic. They're ones that you don't want, There's the argument to be made that homeopathy, right, that a very, very, very small amount is maybe beneficial. But this is completely unproven that, a very small amount of a lot of these radioactive or poisonous substances are beneficial at any amount. So a lot of salt has quite a lot of lead in it. And obviously I have a thing where I have toxic levels of lead still in my blood because it's extremely slow to get rid of it. And so when I look for salt, that's one of the things I'm looking for is low levels of lead. There's a good website, which you can ask me for a link to, because I can't remember right now, but I think it's called Lead Free Mama. She goes through, she has like a very expensive piece of lead
lead
testing.
safe Mama.
Thank you. She has a very expensive piece of lead testing equipment, and she goes through and tests all kinds of, I think, crockery and stuff like that. But I think she also did one with salt at one point. And so she goes through a bunch of different common brands and tells you how much lead she actually found in there versus how much they say is in there. I would say, it's a bit of a hassle, but if you are willing to do whatever it takes, the half an hour research to find a salt that is available to you, that is low in toxicity, then from now on, just have that. It's not something that you have to keep looking into, but it's something to look into once. I think that's worth doing.
Wonderful. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, good point too that you made also about if you go to the hospital, it's one of the first things that you do get. So, are there, you talked about the low end, the high end. Is there a dose that we're aiming for on a daily basis, or is it subjective?
It's tricky, When I say you have the amount that you want, the other challenge of that some people talk about is, well, let's say you have a lot of salt though, right? Because you really fancy it. What's going to happen is you're going to become more thirsty, right? So here's the thing. But a lot of people don't drink enough fluids, according to what a lot of people say. So they really struggle to have their 8 cups a day or 2 liters a day. Now, I know that this is fraught with contention. All sorts of people have different opinions on that. Some people say, you shouldn't be drinking any water. You should only have, a little bit with fruits or milk or whatever, all the way to the other end of people saying you should have, 5 to 10 liters a day. But let's just stick with the 2 liters-ish for if you're the average build and weight kind of idea. I would say, if you're consuming enough salt that you are constantly thirsty and you're craving, maybe a lot more than that, 4 or 5 liters a day or more, then that might be a sign that you're overdoing it. But conversely, if you can barely drink a glass of water all day, I would say that is a classic indication that you have not had enough salt, even if you don't particularly have a craving for it, right? I think it's just about finding the amount that makes you a reasonable level of thirsty and makes you satiated. I think those are the 2 factors. As to the specific amounts, again, obviously I've seen experts and anecdotes of people saying that 0 is best, but I've also seen experts and anecdotes of people saying 20 grams a day resolved their high blood pressure, or 20 grams a day, and they finally were stopped feeling anxiety and, stuff like that. So I've seen a really wide range. I think that 20 grams a day could be dangerous for some people. So I'm not saying to try that, but I'm just saying you really want to base it on how you feel. The other thing to be aware of is potassium, So generally potassium is not focused on because it's kind of in everything. Salt, by the way, is the most common supplement in the world, even though it's not thought of as a supplement. There's very few foods that contain it, and there's certainly, it's very, very hard to get enough from just food. Probably the highest that I know of is like samphire, which they sometimes put with seafood, very salty tasting green vegetable. Celery is supposed to have a bit, stuff like that. Obviously, anything in the sea, like especially sea vegetables, nori and kelp and all that, will have some sodium because they're from the sea. But yeah, generally most foods that most people eat, you have to supplement salt. Potassium isn't everything compared to salt, but potassium deficiency is actually a lot more common than people think. So potassium is something that is balanced with sodium. There's this kind of process of getting things into and out of the cell that relies on this back and forth between sodium, potassium, as well as calcium and magnesium. And you want to have the right balance between the 2 of them. And so if you do have a lot of sodium because you crave it, I would say you also want to be aware of potassium. Again, if you have that very low, if you have that, under average, significantly low blood pressure, you probably, another test you can do is to be in the dark for a minute in front of a mirror and then turn on like a flashlight and shine it in your eye. And what will happen is obviously your pupil will contract a lot, right? Because it will have expanded when you're in the dark, and then it will contract when you flash the light on it. If it struggles to maintain its contraction, if it seems like a lens that keeps trying to open up, that is, I've seen doctors say that is an indication, a test you can do yourself, that indicates that you don't have enough sodium, that you actually have high level of potassium. So sodium is more of a contracting, constricting thing, and then potassium is more of an opening, relaxing thing. Just like with calcium, magnesium. Calcium is a contracting thing. Magnesium is a relaxing thing. And so if you're unable to maintain that contraction with the eye, then they say that can be a sign of a lack of sodium. So yeah, potassium is something that I do think that people can get deficient in, especially if they're that other side that we talked about, right? If you're not on that side, if you're more that high cortisol, high blood pressure kind of person, you still crave a lot of salt because you're generally stressed, and maybe you don't eat, a very whole foods diet, you eat more of a processed diet. Between all those things, you can end up low in potassium. Potassium is, high in vegetables, especially potatoes, famously high, fairly high in meat, very high in coconut water. They say that coconut water is like the perfect electrolyte beverage, but I never really understood that. I mean, literally all it is water, loads of potassium, a very small amount of sodium and sugar. It doesn't have everything that you need at all, but it does have a lot of potassium, which can be very beneficial for a lot of people. So potassium, salt also makes you feel warm, and potassium makes you feel cold. So that's another potential indicator. If you feel cold all the time, then sodium might be able to help. But if you feel hot all the time, then more potassium may be able to help. And potassium foods are generally more, cooling foods. So yeah, those are some of the little ways that you can tell. But yeah, it's kind of anecdotal. The only other way that you can really tell is to get a cellular read of your levels, which is actually quite unusual. NutrEval gives you a cellular level of potassium, but not sodium. The reason is your body keeps a very tight band of sodium and potassium in your blood at all times. So the doctors often check it if you come into hospital with some kind of emergency, because if it is out of the range, that's a sign of a serious problem. But it's unusual unless there's a serious problem. So basically, it kind of always looks like you have a reasonable amount of sodium and potassium, but that level in your blood is not indicative of your storage of those things, whether you have a good supply of those things. And for me, as someone who has a tendency to high cortisol, that's been one of the trickiest things for me to replenish on my NutrEval tests. It took the longest. I managed to get my magnesium up to a good level a lot sooner before I managed to get my potassium up. It's not particularly easy to build your potassium up if you have that tendency to high cortisol.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. I just need to take a moment to quickly tell you about a way that you can support the podcast by getting high quality, affordable supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is they have great quality products with minimal fillers, but the prices are very affordable. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're really helpful and friendly. And what I love most of all is the amazing descriptions Elwin's written for each product category about that topic. There's so much information and education on it. I've actually learned more from reading their product descriptions than I have from most articles. So, to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, you can use promo code RejuvenateMe for a 20% discount off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order with promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net. You mentioned a few things here in the sense of having too little sodium salt or too high. So there are some safety concerns here. So are there any other specifics that we should name for individuals as they're beginning this journey of looking at this in this way?
Yeah, for potassium as well. Too much potassium can literally kill you. If you inject not even a crazy amount of potassium into someone, that's often what they give people when they give them a lethal injection to kill them, because it creates a heart attack. So those levels of electrolytes being in balance is seriously important. I've related it more to the adrenals, but it's it's absolutely essential for the cardiovascular system. So yeah, too much or too little sodium or potassium is potentially life-threatening.
So salt isn't absolutely the devil it was made out to be. It's an absolutely vital aspect of our lives, and we really do need to look at it and take it seriously, as well as the potassium, as you were mentioning. So thank you. Yeah, it's not so demonizing. It's something that we absolutely need, and it's been used in very much in life-saving practices.
Absolutely, for a very long time. I mean, it used to be considered, as valuable as gold, right? The word salary comes from Roman soldiers being paid in salt, a little bit of trivia, but it just gives that idea. Now, that's partly also because salt helps to preserve meat, which, is something that, fridges are only a recent invention, right? That's another aspect of it. But it's generally considered, salt is something that is very valuable. And yet, if you're stuck at sea and all you have to drink is seawater, it's something that can kill you, right? So it's just one of those things that throughout our history, we've known that some is very valuable and too much is very dangerous.
Well, as you've always said, what makes something a poison is its dosage.
Yes, I think that originally came from Paracelsus, the father of medicine, but thank you for crediting me with it.
One final question before we complete, which is, I've listened to everything that you've said about all these supplements, from all the episodes that we've put together. Now, to be honest, from hearing it, it sounds like I should be taking every single one of them. So let me ask you, how should somebody be discerning about, okay, yeah, that sounded good, that sounded good, that sounded good, how much or how little of all of this should they be taking? Because otherwise, they're just going to be rattling around as they walk with all the supplements.
Well, unfortunately, it's not a simple answer because it just depends on so many factors. Like you've asked that question after every nutrient. I think the first thing is, are you ready, more importantly, and are you able to get enough from diet, right? If you eat loads of flesh, like muscle meat, you can probably leave the creatine unless you're trying to build muscle or, improve athletic performance. If you eat loads of beans, you probably don't need molybdenum. If you do eat lots of egg yolks in your liver, you don't need choline. If you eat lots of apples, you don't need calcium glucarate. If you have lots of bone broth, you don't need glycine. So if you eat lots of animal protein, then you probably don't need lysine. So, start with eliminating the things that you think, I'm getting enough from diet. That's fine. Second of all, you could be like, well, I'm not getting enough from diet, but I could be, right? So, I love egg yolks, so I'll just eat more of them, and then that covers my choline need, right? So that's another way of looking at it. And then thirdly, I'd like this to be easier at some point. It would be great if you could put together just a supplement with, like, you can choose your own, I'll have this much of this and this much of this, and it's all just in one place. That would be great. But it's one of those things about this world, like life is, I think a lot of people treat life as they wish it were, and then are disappointed it's not that way. So, I wish it were the way that everyone would just get everything they needed without having to earn it or work for it, because, it would be better, right? I don't like seeing anyone lacking what they need. I don't like fearing that I'm going to lack what I need or someone I care about is going to lack what they need. But it's just not life, right? And it would be great if everyone was, highly intelligent and never did anything stupid, but that's not life. And it would be great if everyone was really beautiful and everything they created was really beautiful, but that's not life, etc., right? So it would be great if you could just get everything you needed from the type of food that is available to you easily and cheaply. But that's not life, unfortunately, and I think it's great I don't think we should just passively accept it. I think it's great to ask the question, why is that, right? And why are, the people who are supposed to be protecting us allowing our food to be so depleted in nutrients and so full of poisons, and why are they subsidizing foods that tend to be quite low in nutrients and maybe even banning foods that are high in nutrients? These are all good questions, and these are all things that I'm glad that there's more and more awareness of, right? And people are starting to think about it and all of that kind of stuff. But until we've resolved all that, we still have to face life as it is, right? And life as it is it's really, really hard to get all of that. And I would say, even, without blaming the government or the politicians or big business or whoever we want to blame, even without all of that stuff, as I said, life is just not easy. If you look at people like Weston Price, who looked at all these cultures who were healthy, who ate these traditional diets, you could see the amount of effort that they went to make that happen, Like, for instance, the amount of effort that a lot of cultures went to take grains or beans and process them in a way that made, broke down a lot of the anti-nutrients and made them as digestible as possible and preserved them well and freed up, a lot of the nutrients to be more easily absorbable and that kind of stuff. They would often spend days, fermenting and processing and this and that. And, it's a massive hassle among a bunch of people who already, had to walk maybe several miles a day to get water and all that thing. You think they were doing all that because they were like, orthorexic, as they call it, because they were like, uptight about food? No, they did it because it was necessary to get the nutrients they needed. And so I'd say it's the same in this day and age, right? Like all our ancestors used to have to go to immense efforts to get the nutrients they needed. And in our own little way, we still have to go to more effort than we'd like to get the nutrients we need. We can't just, go to a supermarket, throw a few instant meals in a basket and throw them in the microwave and expect it, or go to order a takeout or whatever, right? It is more difficult, but that's just life. So, of course, some people, opt out of it. I'm not interested. And some of them do okay. Some of them do great. But a lot of people don't, right? Look at the rate of chronic disease. Am I saying all of that is down to nutritional deficiencies? Definitely not. Like a lot of it is down to toxicity excesses. A lot of it is down to a lot of other stuff that we've talked about many times. But even if stress is the problem, even if toxin is a problem, having enough of a certain nutrient might still help. Like we've talked about, if you have enough creatine and choline, it helps your body to methylate to maybe deal with other stuff. If you have enough glucarate, it helps your body to deal with all those estrogens coming in. If you have enough B1, it helps your body to deal with all those simple carbohydrates. Except if you have enough lithium, it helps your body deal with the extreme stresses of the fact that we seem to be slipping into World War III every day or whatever. Even if it's not the root of the problem, it can still help to support your body with these nutrients. And if you really think about it, I always say to people, start with building blocks. Often you have to go to hormones and you have to do detoxification strategies and you have to do lifestyle changes. And yeah, sure, if you're very poor, probably start with lifestyle changes. We should definitely do one of these for lifestyle things. If you can't afford to buy anything other than the cheapest thing, and I relate to that. I remember when my food budget was like £1 per meal and I would have 2 meals a day. That's like just over $1, that wasn't even that long ago. So I relate to that, right? And then you don't prioritize building blocks because you make do with the building blocks you can get and you prioritize lifestyle. And if you really do very, very well at lifestyle, you'll probably be better off than someone who prioritizes building blocks in the way that I'm talking about. Because building blocks make a massive difference as to how well your body absorbs nutrients, how efficiently your body utilizes the nutrients, how little it wastes the nutrients, all that kind of stuff. So, but otherwise, most people, it seems, although most people don't have a lot of money, I would still say that more people have, a bit of money than spare time. Or maybe it's not time, but it's more like the discipline to consistently do different practices that help their health, whether it's meditation, whether it's exercise of various types. So it's kind of easier in most cases with most people I talk to just start with the building blocks because it's not very expensive, it's pretty safe, and it can be very impactful, and it can actually resolve the root cause. It can resolve the root issue. Your root issue could just be as simple as you just don't have enough of a simple nutrient. And to me, that's kind of a best case scenario. I mean, it's the ultimate kind of thing for our modern day, right? They say one of the reasons why medical doctors very rarely give lifestyle advice to people is not only because they don't know or because they're incompetent or something, although that may be a factor, but it's because the well-meaning, competent ones who try, most of their patients will be like, oh, I don't want to hear that. Just give me a drug, So that's the other side of this, right? People just want a quick fix. And so, unfortunately, most drugs and quick fixes either don't work or are very bad for you. So the building blocks are kind of the closest you can get to a potentially, maybe a quick fix that is not expensive, probably has low side effects, and might actually be resolving the root issue rather than just, managing symptoms.
Well, thank you, Owen, again for the great education and for this comprehensive list and all the details. And I just want to say thank you to everyone that has joined us today. Please leave your comments below. If there's a nutrient out there that you think you want highlighted, please let us know. And please remember to hit the like and the subscribe button so that you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode. And one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there. Or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.